Ankle injury for a running back, not good. This just in, Earnest Graham might not be coming back. Hi everyone, welcome to our Huddle. Lauren Shehadi alongside senior fantasy football writer Jamey Eisenberg. Jamey, when you're talking about Earnest Graham, he's not 100%. Will he ever be 100% this season?
Well, we'll find out. John Gruden, the coach of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, said that it could be a season-ending injury for Earnest Graham. We'll obviously have more on that throughout the week on CBSSports.com. If Graham is out for the year, that's only going to give work done even more of a boost. He's been a great fantasy reserve this year, but if Graham is out, we know the Bucs are going to continue to run the ball. That means Dunn's going to become probably a number 2 fantasy running back, but it also means that Cadillac Williams, who was just activated off the PUP list last week, that means he now becomes extremely fantasy relevant, and he's definitely worth adding in all leagues at this point. Williams is probably going to work in even if Graham is not out for the year, but at this point, Cadillac Williams could become a very fantasy relevant running back down the end of the season. And if that happens, that's going to be an amazing turn of events because he was out for the entire start of the season based on his knee injury last year.
Let's talk about a lot of guys that are fantasy relevant, talking about the Skins and the boys. Clinton Portis dealing with that knee injury, Tony Romo with that pinky injury. In my opinion, neither of those offenses really got into the groove. Not a lot of production for fantasy owners.
Yeah, it was hard to watch that game, just based on the production of this offensive stars, especially since we expected these guys to play better. Romo was a surprise that he didn't play as well as he did, that he played as poorly as he did, because we expected him to play better. But there was a little bit of rust involved, coming back from the broken finger, missing the previous few games. But he'll get going. T.O. is still there. Jason Witten is still there. Roy Williams still working into the mix. We saw great performance from Marion Barber. This team's going to get back on track. I have no worry about Tony Romo becoming a number 1 fantasy quarterback again. The interesting thing with Clinton Portis is, however, he wasn't expected to play. And the fact that he was on the field and the fact that you see his yards per carry, 4.5 yards per carry, was much better than I think a lot of people expected. We told people coming into the game basically to avoid the Redskins running backs because Portis was expected to miss the game or be limited. Labdell Betts was going to play, Sean Alexander. It's still Portis' show, and Lauren, as you know, being a Redskins fan, as long as Portis is in there, he's the bell cow for that offense. He's the bell cow for a lot of fantasy owners, so hopefully his knee is going to be able to hold up. He can get back to being a 20-carry guy and get back to being a fantasy MVP.
Yeah, I didn't expect him to even play that game. Okay, let's talk about another NFC East team, talking about the Philadelphia Eagles. What's going on with Brian Westbrook?
Yeah, Westbrook's been a big problem for a lot of fantasy owners, especially the last 3 weeks where he hasn't scored a touchdown, been under 100 total yards. The rushing totals, as you see here against the Bengals, who were terrible against the run, he couldn't get over 60 yards rushing. So I think you'll see Westbrook start to get going, but this is an interesting week for him heading into Week 12 because he's facing Baltimore. As we'll talk about with the Ravens, their run defense fell apart a little bit against the Giants, but prior to the Giants game, averaging only 65 yards per game allowed with only 1 rushing touchdown coming into the game. They haven't allowed a 100-yard rusher in 29 straight games now, so Westbrook is facing a difficult opponent at this point, and so you have to sort of gauge the way he's playing right now versus the opponent. It's a situation similar to what happened last week with LaDainian Tomlinson. Can you afford to sit LaDainian Tomlinson in your league if you have 2 other running backs on your team that are better than Westbrook with better matchups? I don't know if better than Westbrook, but better matchups. Then you sit Westbrook this week.
Okay, Jamey, you were talking about the Ravens running game falling apart. Brandon Jacobs really reaping the benefits there.
Yeah, absolutely. Jacobs ran all over that Ravens run defense. That was unexpected. And imagine if he had played the full game. He went into the locker room in the second quarter to get retaped according to the team. No injury was reported, but he didn't play much in the second half. That opened the door for Derek Ward and Ahmad Bradshaw. Listen, Jacobs has become a number 1 fantasy running back, if not a top 5 guy at this point. The Giants' offensive line, the best in the NFL, and I think that will only continue for Jacobs, and he's going to run all over the Cardinals in Week 12. But when you look at Derek Ward, this is a running back who's gotten at least 50 total yards in every game this season. He should be on everybody's fantasy team at this point, being used as a number 3 option or flex player. He could be used as a number 2 fantasy running back, depending on the matchup, because he's going to get carries, he's going to get touches. And again, the way this offensive line is playing, you start him at this point because the Giants are that good. But when you look at Ahmad Bradshaw, he really only factors at this point in games where the Giants are blowing out opponents like what happened here. But the thing about Bradshaw is he almost broke that streak. He almost became the first running back in 28 games to run for 100 yards against the Ravens. So I still hold off on starting Bradshaw at this point, but he's somebody to keep an eye on.
Don't start Bradshaw. Okay, you're going to start Jonathan Stewart and DeAngelo Williams. These Carolina guys are just going off. 120 yards, 3 touchdowns combined. Pretty good.
Yeah, 120 yards for each guy at least. You look at what DeAngelo Williams has become a number 1 fantasy running back at this point. He's a top 10 guy, having a phenomenal season. So I think you start him in all leagues no matter who they're facing. Jonathan Stewart is the interesting one, though, because he's been sort of hit or miss this year. We expected him to be the number 1 guy there, but Williams has held him off. Stewart has become more of a flex option, number 2 sort of fantasy running back. This is his best game so far as a pro. Will it continue in Week 12 at Atlanta? It's hard to say, but I think you look at Stewart and what he has in store for him. if they're going to get carries like this, the interesting thing for me, Lauren, is Jake Delhomme can't throw the ball right now. He's had 2 games with under 100 yards passing, they're making up for it running the ball on the ground. So we'll see if this kind of production continues. You start Williams, you use Stewart if you really don't have anybody else. I would potentially say to start Stewart over Brian Westbrook this week.
What would you say, Jamey, about Peyton Hillis? Because for me, I was really surprised about how he's kind of carrying the workload.
Yeah, it's interesting, because we talked about Clinton Portis. Since Clinton Portis left Denver and went to Washington, they've had a different leading rusher in the last 4 seasons. So Peyton Hillis now has the opportunity. I don't know if he'll finish as the leading rusher for the Broncos, but he has an opportunity to help fantasy owners with a lot of production. I don't think you're going to get 2 touchdowns on a weekly basis, but he is going to be the short yardage guy for them. He's still going to be a factor coming out of the backfield. They're dealing with a myriad of injuries. We still don't know if Selvin Young's going to make it back from this groin injury at some point. But if Selvin Young factors into the mix, I still think Peyton Hillis is worth adding at this point. He's only owned in 40% of leagues on CBSSports.com, and he's going to continue to share carries whether or not Young is in there with guys like P.J. Pope, Tatum Bell, even Alex Haynes. These guys are all going to become a factor for the Broncos, but Peyton Hillis is still the guy you want to add at this point.
Joseph Addai, definitely a factor. Fantasy owners, you kind of cashed in a little bit on Joseph Addai, his first 100-plus yard game this season.
Yes, this was a big disappointment for him this whole entire year because he was drafted as the number 5 fantasy running back, and coming into Week 11, he was actually number 43 in a standard scoring league. He was 12 spots behind his backup, Dominic Rhodes, in terms of fantasy production. But I think we've been telling people all along, and hopefully you've been listening, that the matchups for the Colts are going to get so much better, starting with this week against Houston, Week 11, and it's only going to get better from here, facing the Chargers in Week 12. He's going to continue to put up this type of production. Whether you're going to get 100-plus total yards and 2 touchdowns on a weekly basis, that's hard to say, but I think he'll give you 100 total yards. He'll give you probably close to a touchdown. He'll get back to being a number 1 fantasy running back, and every fantasy owner that has Joseph Addai and held on to him all season long, they could just say, it's like a fat guy getting a calzone. You're just happy all day long for the rest of the year.
They're cashing in.
That's right.
All right, let's talk for a second about Willie Parker because he is just going off. A lot of people saying he's injured, but his performance is pleading the contrary, really.
Yeah, he missed the last couple of games with his shoulder problem, and people thought that he may be done for the year. There was some reports about a torn labrum, but he put all those doubts to rest. Speaking of breathing a sigh of relief with Joseph Addai, you could breathe a sigh of relief. I'm having trouble saying that. Sigh of relief with Willie Parker.
Too many calzones.
I guess so. The thing about Parker is he also had a touchdown call back on a holding call against the Chargers, but I think this is a good sign that he's back. He's ready to go. He's ready to be fast Willie Parker again. The touchdowns will start to come. He'll get back to being that guy we saw in Week 1 when he ran for 2 touchdowns against the Houston Texans. So I think this gives fantasy owners another sigh of relief that they can use him. I said it good there.
You did.
Use him good there, and that he could perform well for the rest of the year.
Browns, Bills, 15 seconds, your thoughts?
Well, I think this is going to be an offensive show.
Okay.
I do think Buffalo at home is much better than they are on the road. We'll see what happens with the Browns offense if Brady Quinn can repeat the performance he had against the Broncos, but I think you'll see a lot of Marshawn Lynch and a lot of Jamal Lewis this week. All
right. Well, you want to see a lot of Jamey Eisenberg and Dave Richard turn to Fantasy Football Today every Sunday live, 11 o'clock with Jason Horowitz. Good luck tonight, guys. See you later.